Hi Homeworthy, I'm Steve Cordony and I'm excited to show you around a couple of my favourite spaces at my country house in Australia, so come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hey guys, my name's Steve Cordony and I'm interior stylist from Sydney, Australia, and welcome to my country home. Rosedale Farm was a pipe dream. It was 3.5 years in the finding. We searched all around Australia to find a country house, and we came upon a whim to see Rosedale 8 years ago, and it was just love at first sight. And I think everyone always says, you know, the right place will come up when the time is right, and it was like the house found us. So it's 1877 Georgian manor house, and it had great bones, it had beautiful high ceilings, beautiful grounds. We're on 120 acres in Orange, which is about 3.5 hours northwest of Sydney, and a great town with wineries and beautiful restaurants, and so it just became this great place to call, you know, this our country house. We spent 8 years renovating. We went room by room. We did the garden. There's about 30,000 plants and trees that we planted, and we redid every single room from the ground up and rewired and replumbed. But it was, yeah, a really beautiful home that had a lot of heritage in the area, and we wanted to do it justice and bring it back to life. You always have that storybook kind of fairy tale country house in your mind, and we definitely did when we were searching for it. And I think when we drove up, it was just that perfect kind of storybook fairy tale home at the base of a hill, which we knew instantly we could do something with. So welcome to the living room. This is probably one of my favorite spaces in the house. It was originally 2 rooms. This was the formal lounge room, and it was the morning room. And we opened up this wall here to make one big sort of grand lounge space. It has such great light, and I think I just wanted to like really play on that. And so with these 3.6 meter ceiling heights, I wanted to give the walls a bit of texture and a bit of layering. And so we did all this beautiful French paneling, which I love. But then again, to sort of play with that old and new, I painted everything out in this almost a gallery white, which is Popcorn by Porter's Paints. And again, it just gives this sort of clean, crisp layer, but there's so many details with all the detailing, and then you can start to add all these different details and textures and materials with all the other elements that I brought in. So I think once I had the layout of the space, I really wanted to work with a really giant rug to kind of, you know, demarcate this space and I guess kind of join the 2 areas. And so for me, it was all about texture and natural earthy materials, and that's what I love about styling homes and designing homes, is that they should always be living. So I've got lots of different materials in here that are quite sort of earthy and quite natural, and so I really wanted to use this Abaca jute for the rug. So it's a 9 by 3 meter rug, which is quite big, but it really connects both spaces, which I love. And so we've got this sort of more sort of TV lounging space, and then down here, sit by the fire, play games, relax and chill. But because we have this rug, which kind of connects both spaces, it kind of feels like it feels warm, connected and harmonious within the context of these 4 walls. I think for me, the feeling that I wanted within this space was it to feel super, super cozy. There's not that much artwork on the walls because there's these beautiful Australian cedar windows, which I think once I had this sort of crisp background of the white walls, they kind of almost looked at their own frames, and then they have these beautiful vistas outside to the garden, and it just feels quite beautiful and ethereal when you walk through. And so I wanted to kind of introduce the color palette that you can see beyond the windows inside. And so I think I really started with this really beautiful Schumacher fabric, and that was the basis of the color palette and I guess the tones of the overall space. So once I had that color palette, I guess I started to mood board that up, but then I kind of wanted to play with the layout of the space. And for me, it was about sort of introducing this beautiful central table. And I love that because there's 2 entrances now because we opened up this space. So you walk through, and I wanted to have this sort of beautiful round drop gate leg table, which again, beautiful antique piece that I found at an auction. And for me, it just allows me to add so many different styling elements to the table. There's, things, this beautiful tray that I got in Italy. There's all my beautiful selection of books. There's this gorgeous little bamboo bowl that I got from India, and a beautiful sort of paper mache bowl there, and I always have fresh flowers. And so it is almost like this sort of landing point, and you can go either way to the lounge space or to this sort of more chilled, relaxed space. For me, keeping this space very relaxed, playing with the proportions of the furniture in here was really important. I wanted these armchairs to be big and yum and comfy, so you could sit by the fire, look out the window, play games, have a glass of wine, and do all the things that you want to do at the end of the day, but feel sort of really enveloped by the space. Even though this is quite grand, this space, it still feels quite intimate, and I think really working with the layout of furniture and making sure that things are at the right height and chairs are turned into each other, and make sure that practically they're working to feel kind of cozy and to feel quite connected to not only other pieces of furniture but to the people that are using the space, was really important. And then I think, again, talking about all the textures and materials, when I look at the space, there's a lot going on, but really when I think about the color palette, because it is sort of that monochromatic, I guess, color palette, working with that beautiful fabric that I started with, I see lots of different materials. There's beautiful linen on the sofa. There's some gorgeous velvet cushions. There is the rattan of these beautiful floor lamps. There's the gilt of the mirror. Then there's these beautiful 18th century Italianate gilt chandeliers, and then there's my vintage Louis Vuitton trunk and some beautiful the dark antique of the table, and there's marble. And so there's so many different materials and textures within this one space, but it all kind of works because I haven't got so many different colors. And for me, that is the most probably magic part of this room, but also a magic part of when you're layering and you're curating a home. And that's what I love about creating something that feels harmonious, but also works within the confines of the space. So this sort of more lounge space, this was probably the first room that I walked into as I walked in the front door. And again, the first thing that I loved was this beautiful sort of bay window door situation. And it was a tricky one because I didn't know if the dark wood was too dark, was it too red, was it too orange? But now I think once we painted everything around it crisp white, now I look at that and it's almost like this beautiful sort of artwork and a frame out to the front pond and the garden beyond. And so I'm glad that we kept that. And it's, there's so much detail within it, which I love. And it just creates this beautiful connection between inside and outside. The other thing that I really love is these beautiful sort of wide cornices. And I think, that's very much pivotal to that kind of 1877 Georgian style. And we've kind of introduced a lot more of that throughout the house. And for me, again, really about these proportions in these beautiful windows and these beautiful cedar wood, it really kind of tells a story and creates almost like frames and paintings towards the garden. And then everything inside, I've kind of tried to create this beautiful symbiosis between the beautiful architectural details and then some of the furniture. So darker type timber with these beautiful Louis style armchairs that I had recovered. So again, playing with that sort of old meets new, but everything tells the same sort of story. So this is one of 7 fireplaces in the house, and it's the original. We don't use this as much, but because now we've got air conditioning, thank Lord. But also there's a beautiful wood combustion one down here, which again really kind of heats the space. But I just love them. I think again it creates a beautiful focal point. And then I was lucky enough to find these 2 matching, very hard to find matching mantle mirrors at an auction, and they just again reflect the light. They kind of mirror what's going on outside, and creates this sort of special drama within the room. I guess the approach for this particular country house was a bit tricky because there's 19 rooms and there was, the gardens and the interior, and it started off as, very much let's just paint inside, outside, let's redo the bathrooms, redo the kitchen, and then we'll be done. And I think as soon as we sort of started unpacking all of the layers, we realized that we really wanted to do everything from the ground up, and almost had to, because there was a few issues that we found along the way. And I think for me as the designer of this particular property, it was I definitely wanted to be sympathetic to the heritage of the actual architecture and I guess the heritage of the house, but I definitely wanted to fuse my style. And so projects that I do sort of city, based in Sydney and around different areas, I guess were a bit sort of harder edged, and I knew that I wanted to make this a bit softer and a bit more conducive to this sort of country lifestyle and country feel, I guess. And so I definitely leaned into that English country manor, countryside kind of style, but really kind of wanted to think about how to start this project. And so there was so many different rooms and I didn't know where to start. And so this is what I always talk about in my masterclasses. It's that, really start with a mood board. And so I went room by room and I started with the office for some reason. I think it was probably the clearest idea of what I wanted that space to be. But then I went room by room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the dining room, and all the bedrooms, and I created an individual mood board for each of those spaces. I knew that this space, the renovation wouldn't be short. I knew that it would kind of be, ongoing. Probably not as long as 6 years, but c'est la vie, here we are. But I definitely wanted to have those visual moments in, on paper so I could see what those spaces would look like. And given that it was such a long renovation, seeing lots of different things as a stylist and a designer and creative director, I see so many things on a daily basis, for work and also play in the digital sphere that we live in. And so it's easy to get blown off course of like, oh, do I want that look now? Or do I want this look? And so I definitely came back to that sort of style blueprint and those mood boards and just worked room by room individually because it was a long process, but all throughout the whole renovation journey, I wanted to make sure that the overall story was told and it was harmonious and it felt like everything worked from one room to the next. The vision for me was definitely this sort of classic English side manor house, but fused with this contemporary overlay. And I think in general, every project that I work on, that's generally my style sort of mood board and my style DNA. But I definitely wanted to kind of keep, I guess, that kind of classicism within the paneling that we put in and really take on with some beautiful antiques and vintage pieces that we brought in. But I wanted to feel quite contemporary and quite conducive to our lifestyle. It was very different how they sort of lived in 1877 and beyond to now. And so, we wanted to open up some spaces and some rooms to make it a bit more open plan living, but still keep the coziness. So I think it was definitely all about balance and getting that idea of classic meets modern, old meets new, and really playing with that contrasted duality. And that's my style in general. Any project that I do, I always want to have a nod to the past, but firmly sort of looking at the future. And definitely a neutral monochromatic color scheme. That was probably one of the most important things, to be able to kind of get that balance of old and new. So this is the main dining room, formal dining room, I should say. And this was definitely a sort of dream space and wallpaper that I saw many, many years ago. I stored it away in my inspiration file, and I knew that I wanted to use it somewhere where it would have drama and impact. For me, it kind of reminds me of the garden that we're surrounded by, the house. It's definitely more tropical and sort of fantastical, but it really is this sort of convivial space that always starts a conversation. And for me, this Excel, it's by Excel, which is a London brand, and it's this incredible sort of, I guess, wallpaper that has this beautiful texture through it. And it's almost been inspired by these 17th and 18th century wall tapestries. And so for me, it just kind of gives this incredible story of what's beyond. But I've had so many people that have come into this space, whether they are into design or not, or nieces or nephews, young people, old people, and it just blows them away because it takes you to somewhere else. And I think that's what homes should do. They should sort of transport you to a different space and a different time. And so the starting point really was this wallpaper. It's called D-Dream, and it is a dream. It kind of feels fantastical, it feels ethereal, there's monkeys, there's birds. And so essentially what I wanted to do was, again, I guess in my own little way, give it more of a contemporary spin. And so I think adding this beautiful sort of chair rail at 90 centimeters high, painting that again crisp white, just gives it this beautiful kind of juxtaposition between the beautiful moody tone of the wallpaper. And then I kind of just wanted to play on that. And so bring in, again, more contemporary pieces, but that sort of old meets new. The case in point is this beautiful armoire that I found at an auction. And again, the scale was perfect. I love these beautiful brass sort of hinges and hardware, but it was in this sort of brown, a bit sort of slightly orange brown timber. And so what I did was have my carpenter sort of ebonize it and turn it into this beautiful tall black cabinet. And again, all the detail for me when something is painted quite flat, just it brings it out and tells a story. And so that sort of looks really quite tall and quite imposing. But again, this juxtaposition between something that's a bit more fun and classic and fantastical, something that's a bit more hard-edged, it kind of has that really nice sort of duality. And so for me, they're the sort of main elements that I really wanted to play with within the dining room. And then again, another chandelier, because I think you always need a chandelier in a country home. And this was something that I searched for, I don't know, I want to say 2 years for, until I found the exact right thing. So I found this in a beautiful antique store, Graham Geddes in Melbourne. And it's this incredible sort of 18th century Italian style chandelier. And again, I think the idea of having these beautiful crystals, which is quite classic and antique, mixed in with lots of these different other elements, super contemporary chairs. It just has that mix and that sort of meld. But because everything is in, a really harmonious color palette, it seems to sort of work. And so they're those main elements that I love in this space. And I think, we've had so many parties here, we've had events, we've had weddings, and the overall mood of this space, yes, visually it looks great and it's sort of imposing, but the mood that this space gives us is really soulful and really special. It feels warm, it feels cozy, and I definitely think that's, thanks to this beautiful wallpaper that wraps around you and wraps around everyone who seems to kind of sit down to share a meal at the table. So this is the dining room, and I promise there's only one of my other favorite spaces. There's three. This one actually leads into the kitchen, which I'll take you through to now. So welcome to the kitchen. This is one of the spaces I think generally everyone seems to kind of conjure around the kitchen. And the starting point for the design was really about three key pieces. It was the floor, the chevron reclaimed oak, which we found it came from France. This beautiful sort of Ralph Lauren billiard pendant, and then the beautiful marble, Arabescato Vagli marble. They were the three elements that I think, thinking of my dream kitchen, they were really at the top on my mood board. And so building the space around those was super important. And I guess for me, it was about creating that kind of classic English style kitchen, but also giving it that contemporary edge. And I think painting the beautiful shaker style cabinetry in this sort of, it's almost charcoal meets sort of khaki green. And what I love about it is that it kind of changes colors throughout the day. So in different lights, it looks slightly more green. Sometimes in the afternoon when there's a bit more warmth in the sun outside, it sort of feels a bit more blue. And then when it's a bit more sort of gray, it feels more charcoal. And so for me, that sort of contemporary element and the idea that it kind of, each space, every time you walk in, it feels different. It feels like a different color. I think that for me is like the most important thing and sort of the fun thing about having a home and creating a home. And so that was sort of, it's a beautiful color called Black Cockatoo by Porter's. And it just moves throughout the day. And I think that's really fun and really playful element within the kitchen. For me, walking into this space, it was half the size, essentially, because it was, a very classic old kitchen. There was an old bathroom in this side. There was a sort of walk-in pantry on this side, and the kitchen was about half of this space. It had a lino floor. It had a very sort of simple, basic kitchen that was done in the 70s. And so even though it wasn't my aesthetic at all, and we completely changed it, I did not want to kind of lose that sort of intimacy and that sort of warmth of those classic English country kitchens. So for me, it was about, looking at the space, how we were going to do the layout. And there were so many elements and so many ways that I could have done this kitchen. I could have made a big, beautiful, long island bench, but I decided to kind of keep it more informal and base it around this beautiful sort of old classic Essie stove that we have. And so I wanted to keep that. I wanted to make the cabinetry feel like it was more sort of not inbuilt. It was, floating pieces of furniture, and then build the story around that. And so having this sort of wide, but, quite packed, quite small kitchen bench was important because I always feel like people gather around it, and it just felt quite intimate. And so I didn't want it to feel too daunting. But because, it's a contemporary world, there's a lot of things that we need to house, I made sure that we have lots of beautiful cabinetry. And so throughout all of this cabinetry, we use these pocket doors, which you sort of open up, and this is one of the beautiful little storage units that we have. And so we've got the toaster and the kettle and the coffee machine in there. And then the next one is just more of the pantry, which is not looking the best at the moment. But all these little things, storage, the way that we can kind of like hide things, but also, it's conducive to our life because there's a lot of things that we need on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't feel sort of too imposing within the space of the kitchen. And so all those practical elements, I think for me, were really important, but as well as the visual storytelling. And I think a lot of the things that I see when I'm styling or designing kitchens, I want there to be that really nice balance of practical, but also really aesthetic. And I think that's why I have lots of artwork in the kitchen. I've got these beautiful styling elements and little vignettes that I've created on the bench tops, just like I would on a coffee table or a bedside table or a hallway console. And so I keep that sort of same aesthetic and styling, idea in the confines of the kitchen, but I make sure that they're practical. So where I've got, interesting little things like this beautiful salt holder that I got in Italy. It's a beautiful piece that's also practical. There's my salt, but it also looks great on the kitchen bench. And so using little vases to house parsley and herbs and things like that. Those little styling tips for me, that's sort of the most exciting thing about playing with that, really utilitarian idea of what a kitchen should be, but making it sort of really visually beautiful and aesthetic with pieces that are around you that you just love and that feel good. One of the things that I loved about the original kitchen was this old English Essie stove and oven, and it's powered by wood, and so it is so beautiful to cook on. We don't use it all the time because the fire makes a bit of a mess. We've got the new bank of ovens over here. For me, I really wanted to build, this sort of back end of the kitchen around this beautiful oven. And we updated the tiles around the back with these beautiful deep green Zellige tiles, which again, kind of work with the color of the cabinetry. And for me, it kind of mixes in that old meets new sort of element. And again, I love cooking. It's very rare that I get to cook and host so much now because I'm always traveling a lot. But for me, entertaining at home and building a space and designing a space around the idea of entertaining is super important. For me, I love tablescaping, but I think whenever I'm entertaining, I always want to think about one idea. And so that could be, a story that you want to tell. It could be the occasion. It could be inspired by a movie that you've seen or a restaurant that you've just visited in Italy or, France. And so building the story around that is always a really simple way to start, creating something, even if it's something informal for your family, for friends, thinking about ideas that you can take to create something magical so they can share a beautiful meal around the table is important for me. And again, I love to think about what flowers I'm using. I tend to use a lot of fruit and vegetables within my tablescaping. I've got lots of leftover parsley here from an event that I just did last weekend, and using things that are, do feel quite utilitarian and do feel quite, especially being on the farm, I went to the veggie garden and I grabbed lots of beautiful pumpkins and chard and rhubarb and parsley and put it all together to create this sort of very harvested look, which suited what I was doing in terms of the concept. And I think also thinking about where the food is situated. I love to just cook big, things that are very simple, throw them in the oven, and then so usually this bench is usually used for, you know, a buffet style, you know, eatery, and so I kind of put all my big beautiful vintage chopping boards out there and just, you know, let people come up and enjoy it, and it just feels like so much more personal because you're at someone's home. All those little styling details, as long as they go back to the concept and the theme that you're trying to create, make something that's seemingly an informal Sunday family dinner super special. So the next space that I want to show you is take you upstairs to the primary bedroom and bathroom. So I studied interior design at a college, design college in Sydney, and I got affiliated with Belle magazine, which was a runner-up in the Belle Young Interior Designer of the Year. I did not win, but that's okay. I'm not bitter about it at all. But it was the first foray into sort of magazine land, and I think I always knew that I loved obviously interior design and doing all that hard design stuff. But for me, it was really about the styling elements and creating those moments within a home or within a photo shoot, and creating and telling a story. And so for me, working in magazines for 6 years, you know, various different editorial titles and their advertising, and then I started working with events and creating these, you know, basically telling stories for magazines, for private weddings and events. And so I think for me, growing through that sort of process and I think definitely honing my skills as an editorial stylist led to sort of what I'm doing now, which is, you know, building a business and doing products and sort of, you know, working with global brands locally, overseas, and hosting events and sharing as much of the knowledge that I've learned over the 18 years of my career with as many people as I can. And so, yeah, it's been a fun journey, but, you know, I think really starting with creating the best and telling the best story that I can through that magazine lens has sort of led me to where I am now. My mum was an interior decorator and my father was a builder, and so I was always around renovating and, you know, colours and samples but then also seeing the actual, you know, incarnation of these houses that Dad was building. So definitely growing up with Mum and Dad doing that, you're working side by side a lot of the time, definitely led me into this sort of space. But I think growing up, I was very heavily influenced by performing arts, and I did lots of, you know, drama and music and dance and all those sort of performing arts sort of genres. And then I think just growing and I got to sort of high school and I started sort of thinking about more of the creative arts. And for me, I guess when I look at my early editorial work, and even now to a degree with the events and, you know, beautiful campaigns that I produce with different brands, there is always an element of theatre and theatrics. And so for me, I think it was, you know, moving into the creative arts really kind of told the story and kind of, I got to hone a bit of the love for performing, but also within this sort of creative realm, which, yeah, it touched on all of those different things. So this is the primary bedroom, which funnily enough was actually originally 3 rooms that we opened up to create one sort of more generous space, and then we added an ensuite through here. The thing that I love about this space was that originally it was the nursery, so it was where they used to have kids, and the teachers, the previous owners that were here before us were teachers, and they would actually take classes here and give classes to kids from local schools. And so it sort of has like quite a nice feeling. And the thing that I love the most about it is that it has windows on both sides, and so the light is beautiful all throughout the day. And I knew that I wanted this space to feel very kind of warm, very cozy, and stick to that beautiful sort of navy blue and tones of blue, because when you look outside, you see the beautiful blue of the lake, you see the beautiful sky, and it is so bathed in light. And so for me, this space was a really generous space to be able to work with. And so I wanted to create little breakout spaces within the context of, you know, hero in the bed, but then having this little kind of nook in the corner, which is bound by this Kentia palm, so you feel like you're somewhere, you know, being fanned by this beautiful plant, and then having another little nook over on this side with this beautiful vintage leather chair that I had reupholstered, and just little breakout spaces, because I think for me in the bedroom, it should feel quite warm and enveloping and feel like a place that you can go, and not just to sleep, but also to relax and to unwind. And so having little breakout spaces when you do have a generous space to be able to kind of work within those confines is really magic and feels like, you know, it creates that sense of warmth and coziness. The idea of keeping, I guess, this really neutral palette with the beautiful jute of the carpet and then the beautiful linen of the bedhead and these sort of simple details with this leather of this Ralph Lauren pendant was really sort of the background to be able to overlay a beautiful tone of blue. And I saw this, again, another Schumacher fabric, which is this chinoiserie. And I saw this beautiful fabric at a fabric house when I was sort of wandering around, and I just thought it's such a beautiful color and such a beautiful pattern that it almost reminds me of sort of little pockets when I look out the window. And so for me, adding these little Roman blinds to this space rather than doing tall sort of long drapes made it feel more contemporary, but again, kept it quite like it was telling a story. Each little sort of section tells a little story. And I think, again, overall, within the overall space of the house, that's really what I wanted every room to do. Introducing different textures and materials like this beautiful leather and then the brass detail of the cabinetry and then, you know, the leather and the brass of the beautiful pendant. These vintage trunks we found at an auction, which are great. I love the mix of brass and leather. And for me, again, all these little textures, they feel quite neutral, but when you see them within the context of a room, all of those layers build on top of each other to create this space that feels, you know, one-dimensional when you walk in, but then you start to unpack all the different layers and then you see all these new pockets and it starts to unravel. And I think that's the magic of creating an interior, is you should walk into a space, instantly be hit by, you know, the beautiful overarching theme of that room, but then as you kind of get deeper and deeper into that space, start to unpack its layers and see all the little details that surround it. So from here, this primary bedroom leads into the primary bathroom, which is a little bit like a hotel space. And I want to show you that now because it's probably the space that I spend a lot of time in, bathing, sitting in the bath, which makes me feel very relaxed at the end of the day. So the starting point for this bathroom was really about, I had just come back from France and it was an amazing sort of hotel that I'd stayed at that had this really generous marble bathroom. And whenever I'm styling any bathroom, I always wanted to make it feel like a beautiful five-star hotel. It was actually really nice that we had these proportions to play with. There was this sort of raised platform which we didn't really need to keep, but I'm glad we did because we've kind of created this wet zone with the marble, and we've got the shower and the toilet and then the bath in the middle. And it just created this sense of sort of theatre, again, like elevating it, creating a stage almost for this beautiful marble tub. And for me, it's just, again, really all about that mix of old and new. So we've got this beautiful sort of wall that we've done here with the paneling again, and then the bath sits in front of that. The only thing that I didn't get in this bathroom was I wanted to really put a fireplace behind here, but unfortunately it just wasn't practically, we weren't able to do it. So, you know, we went with the paneling, and I think it still works in the context of having, you know, a bit of a focal point in this space. And, you know, this is one of my favorite little portrait paintings that I found at an auction locally. And it just sits there, and I think all these little styling elements work to make it feel quite glamorous. But again, always playing with that old and new. And so I knew that on my mood board was lots of black steel frame windows and doors. And so particularly in this space, we had them done. And again, it creates this sort of beautiful symmetry within the space, but also this sort of harder edged, which contrasts with everything going on, especially these beautiful antique mirrors that I found at a store in Sydney. And again, all these little details like the gilt mixes into the brass and then the bronze and then the beautiful marble. So all these different textural elements and material elements match to kind of feel quite special and quite luxe. But then again, similarly to when I'm styling the kitchen and thinking about those more practical spaces, I try to kind of, you know, change that trend and turn it on its head a little bit to kind of bring in lots of decorative elements. And so even when I'm thinking about all the styling elements that I'm bringing in, I'm thinking about details and how they look within the space. And so I've got these little beautiful little table here that was once in the lounge room, but I brought it up to be this little pedestal table that has some bath salts and a beautiful candle, thinking about monogram details on the towel, all these little elements that we can, make ourselves feel special on the daily. I think for me, having those little special elements that make you feel, enveloped and make you feel like your everyday moments and everyday rituals feel quite elevated. I think that for me is really important about creating a space and creating home, and definitely a really good way to do that within the confines of a bathroom. It's where I do a lot of my creative thinking and creative work. And so I think, thinking about those spaces and how we can kind of really hone that creativity. I usually change this artwork out for a mirror or different artwork, and I'm always constantly changing the vase and the style of flowers that I'm doing. But even having, curtains in the bathroom, I think is quite wild. But we did this beautiful wax cotton. And again, it's all about adding that drama and that sense of theatre, but things that make you think, things that make you feel good, things that make my mind feel more creative. And in the confines of this space, which again is quite generous as a primary bathroom, you can do it. But you can also bring those little tips and those little elements like I talked about with the monogramming and the choice of flowers and the beautiful little amenities that you can bring in even to a smaller space. And so for me, yes, this is definitely one of my favorites. I usually have the candle on, the bath going, I look outside to the beautiful lake beyond, and it's a place to relax, unwind at the end of the day, and it makes me very, very happy. So the last space that I want to show you on the inside of the house is my office, which is the first room that I renovated at the start of this renovation. So I'm going to take you back downstairs into the library/office. So this is the office space, which funnily enough was the very first space that I decided to renovate. I don't know why, because it's probably the room that I used the least. But I think when you have a clear idea in your mind of what you want a space to be, you kind of just tend to go with that. And I'm glad I did start with this space because it kind of informed a lot of the other spaces beyond and the other areas of the house. And so I had this inspiration and this idea that it would be a very sort of Ralph Lauren inspired study, office, library space. And I definitely wanted to kind of play on that idea of a beautiful sort of navy, indigo blue space. And so the hallmarks and those, I guess, three key elements were this beautiful grass cloth wallpaper. And this is one of my favorite things. It's a chevron sort of pattern, but again, because these rooms are quite generous and quite tall in terms of the ceiling heights, but sometimes can feel a bit cool. And so what I wanted to do was warm them up and give everything a bit more of a texture. And so I love this idea of this grass cloth wallpaper by Philip Jeffries. And it really kind of informed this color palette, but also gave the idea of this pattern for the eye to kind of like draw your eye upwards with this chevron. From there, what I wanted to do was have a really beautiful chandelier. Again, something that I guess was very classic Ralph Lauren, and it has leather and brass detail. And for me, those sort of two elements in terms of materiality and a texture are really important. And I love that it kind of has this, I guess, classic look, but a sense of modernity because of the materials. Then my third element that I just absolutely loved and fell in love with when I was sort of at a rug store, Cadbury's in Sydney, was this beautiful antique Chinese Peking rug. And again, I just saw the colors, I saw the pattern, and I just knew that it would just feel so glamorous in this office space. And again, the color and the tonality of this rug started to inform everything else going on within the space. And so I had my very dear friend Morgan from Symbol Studio, who does all of my window coverings, come up with these beautiful velvet blue fabric drapes, and I just think they are my favorite thing in this room. And again, the idea of these textural elements that just feels good, even if you're not physically touching them, you can see that it feels sort of warm and plush and lush. And again, taking them right up almost just under the cornice creates this sort of sense of drama and draws the eye upwards, and it just feels super glam, super luxe, but also really warm and really inviting. There's so many different elements that I love within this space, and I think, again, a house should always tell the story of where you've been and where you've been on your travels and things that have been handed down. And so I like to be surrounded when I'm being creative in this space and working. It's very tidy here. It's not usually this tidy. There's usually samples everywhere. There is books. There is things on the floor, on the wall, pinned up. I definitely want to be surrounded by things that remind me of a time and place and remind me of things and tell stories. And so all these different elements, whether it's this little chapati wrap that I got in India, or this beautiful Chinese urn, or this, one of my favorite candles, and, pictures, and these beautiful hand-blown glass paperweights that I made in the Maldives, just different things that kind of give you little sort of snippets of a time and place. For me, work, again, anywhere in the house, but particularly in the office, because you're constantly surrounded by it, and it just reminds you when you are working and you're stressed and you're kind of trying to come up with an idea, it's nice to just look away for a minute, be surrounded by things that sort of fill your heart with a sense of personality and a sense of joy, and to kind of get you through to that sort of next project. And so for me, this space feels, I guess, like that kind of initial look that I kind of set out for it to be, but it also feels like it's very much me and feels connected to this space. Again, you can see out through the window, but it feels like a creative space, a space that I do a lot of work in, I create. Sometimes I even come and just sit on the armchairs opposite the desk and just sort of, relax in here. And so all those different elements, there's a lot that goes on in this room, but I love that it feels harmonious. It feels like it's quite warm, quite enveloping, and so personal to this particular space and to my story. So that is everything for the inside, but I want to show you I'm not going to show you the whole garden because it is 120 acres on the land, but I want to show you one of my favorite spaces, which is the very last place that we sort of renovated. We added a pool and these sort of Italianate gardens, which was really the missing link to everything that we sort of did within the property. And now that it's done, it just feels like the whole space is complete. So I want to show you that to finish the tour. I think the feeling that I want people, as soon as they walk in the front door of my home, to feel is at ease and to feel super welcomed. That's the initial thing that I want them to feel in the hall and the foyer. And I do that through various things with, a beautiful home scent. There's always fresh flowers, and there's lots of beautiful warm textures that sort of evoke, I guess, this intangibility of feeling surrounded and connected. But I think even more so than that, I want the home to really tell a story of me and my journey and my story and where I've been, and so have beautiful personal knickknacks and styling objets from my travels and things that have been handed down. And so instantly when people walk through the door, I want them to get my story, my journey, but also feel like they are so welcomed, like they could be at their own home. So Bedford and Ren and I want to show you the last space that we renovated. We finished this 2 years ago, and it really kind of completed not only the garden, but the overall sort of grand scheme and grand renovation of the overall property, which is the pool area, which is definitely inspired by Italian gardens, and that sort of big, beautiful scenery and vista out to the countryside below. Yes, the guys are trying to get on the action. But yes, this is our pool area where we spend a lot of time in summer. Not so much now because it is the dead of winter. The old orangery, which is an old hay shed, and we've turned it into a really beautiful, I guess, entertaining space, which we love to sort of share meals and dinners and lunches, and we've hosted events and things. And so it is this quite a big space for a pool area, but we had so many references of these beautiful pools in the middle of a good grassy knoll. And this is one of the spaces on the property that has a beautiful vista to the countryside beyond. There's a lot of trees around the house, but here you feel like you are definitely elevated. You feel like you kind of see the beautiful countryside, the rolling hills, and it feels like you could be anywhere. It was definitely inspired by a beautiful Tuscan farmhouse or villa. And so we've got lots of different plants that sort of replicate that within the garden. So we found these beautiful sort of 15-year-old olive trees, and we planted an olive grove down below. We've got lots of carpet roses. We've got beautiful peach trees, which are now dormant because it's winter, but they're really stunning. We've got lots of rosemary, and then over in the orangery, We've got lots of beautiful terracotta pots filled with citrus and lemons and mandarins and oranges, and all of those sort of, I guess, not only beautiful visual plants, but all those sensorial elements that make it feel like we're somewhere else. And so we've got big, beautiful spaces here where we usually host lunches out on the grass, but also a great entertaining space and an outdoor kitchen, which for me, again, even though I love cooking, I don't get to do it that much, but when we have the family up, my sister's a great cook, my mum's a great cook, and so we kind of get to use this space, this beautiful outdoor kitchen, and then the outdoor bathroom beyond. So everything's sort of here, self-contained, which is super fun because, you know, we bring everything out here and we could almost spend the whole weekend just out here playing. The dogs have a great time, obviously, as you've heard. We've got the barbecue, we've got the fridge, the ice maker, the dishwasher, we've got the bathroom and showers beyond. And it just feels like a great space to come and, you know, relax for the day and almost have, it's almost like a home in your home. And again, it's just lovely being outside. I love the pool. Being able to entertain within this space it is really important to us. And so we've kind of added this big, I guess, orangery space where I said there's lots of, you know, the citrus, but also a place where we can kind of host anywhere from, you know, 5 to 60 people in here. And it's just a really lovely space that feels, again, connected to the exterior. The horses are down there in the vista, but also feels really connected to the pool, and a space that we just love to come and hang. And I think this is, you know, one of the things that why it felt like it was the last missing piece of the puzzle. Now it just feels like every element within, from the house to the veggie garden to the front lake to, you know, the space at the end, our nursery, now to this pool area, which sort of has everything here. It just feels like now everything feels harmonious. It feels connected, and the space and the renovation after 8 years finally feels complete. The meaning of home for me is really about self-expression. And I think the 4 walls that we're bound by at home now more than ever, because there's so much going on in the world, really need to be that kind of expression of ourselves, and we need to feel like, you know, we're connected to that space and we feel so at home and so at ease and so surrounded and nourished by each space. But I think, again, it should be soulful, it should be personable, it should tell the story of where you've been, who you are now, where you're going. And just like we put on, you know, our fashion and our clothes and we choose outfits of the day, that's exactly the representation of our home. It should tell people about us instantaneously as soon as they walk through the door. And it should feel special, and it should feel soulful, and we should feel connected to ourselves, but also to the space that we've created.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.